Clayton Jarvinen with Thoughts from Sunrise. Right now we are in evening mode. This is the dark mode. I think it's fitting for the subject matter because tonight I am going to talk about something that is potentially triggering, it's dark, and it has the possibility of being enlightening as well. I think it's got a lot of great wisdom in there. Some things have come up in the past week that have really, or past 2 weeks that have given me something to really start to understand something that I'm going to get into. I think that doing something in a little more dark fashion is fine because a lot of times we're interested in wanting to be happy. And I think if you just want to be happy, you've got a problem. I feel strongly about that because there's in the chase for happiness, there is ignoring and leaving out half of the experience. Sort of like the yin and the yang. You know, we've got the light and the dark that come together as one thing. And so, in this quest for eternal happiness and bliss and so forth, we have to acknowledge our dark side. I think that's a really important stage of growth in any mature, accountable person. And I think it's necessary to grow spiritually as well. So, given that, tonight's subject matter is narcissism. And included in that is going to be codependency, and I'll show you how that comes together in the yin and the yang. Because it's easy to say and demonize a narcissist and say, well, that person's a narcissist, and generally that's not a compliment. I would say for the most part, anything having to do with narcissism is not a compliment. But I'm going to show you how there's a possibility that it's also a gift, maybe a backhanded gift, but a gift nonetheless. If you hear music in the background, this is Tina Turner singing the Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. It's a mantra, a Buddhist mantra. So if that's in the background and you hear it, this is what it is. I find it extremely meditative to sit and listen to it. But right now, I just want some background sound. So this narcissist is, and I'm going to cover one that I'm more familiar with, which is the vulnerable or the covert narcissist, which is sort of like the sneak attack narcissist. They're the one where, until you get caught in their trap, you have no idea. And then all of a sudden things start to make sense. But by the time that happens, you're reclaiming your life, basically, because it got sucked out of you. There's the overt narcissists that are obvious, the belligerent ones, the ones that are just, they obviously have some mental illness or some, let's just call it unhealed wounds. I think they're about the same thing, all mental illness. And I'm not a doctor, but I think I'm pretty in tune with some things to where most of this stuff stems either from, if you're on the bandwagon of previous manifestations, it's karma brought forward, or it's, it could be genetic if you're just stuck in science. But then also we are acknowledging that our childhood wounds, our nurturing and upbringing has a massive effect on our psychological and emotional well-being, which then comes manifest in the body through our personality, through ailments and injuries and other things that manifest in our lives. So, given that, I'm going to bring up this image here that I came up with as an illustration. So you can see here we've got the yin and the yang in the middle, and on this side we have narcissist, and on this side we have the codependent. Now, in a reflective reality, you can't have one without the other. So the narcissist needs its opposite side. And in this case, it ends up being a perfect match that I found is the codependent. I only talk about this because I am speaking from experience, my friends. I will classify myself as the codependent, and I can get into why, and then I'll give some descriptions on what these things are. And why I think this is a perfect representation. And just so you know, I realized this as I was looking at it. I didn't do this on purpose in picking sides of the narcissist or codependent. It just came to my head in that way, and I grabbed an image, and it turns out that the narcissist is the black side, and the codependent is the white side. And it actually, when I get into describing this, it'll be very fitting. So this was kind of a lucky accident that this is the way it is on the surface. And now I'm talking specifically for the vulnerable or covert narcissist. I should have added that on there, but whatever. I'm sure they're very similar. I don't have, actually, I do have experience with the other narcissists in my life, but this one that brought this whole thing up is, say, covert or vulnerable is what they're calling them now. They're still working on these classifications, and I'm not a big fan of classifying, but it helps to understand our world. So, if we're not experiencing non-duality at all times, in the dual nature, we have to use our intellect. We have to use these classification systems in order to try to understand and bring meaning to what we're doing. So the narcissist over here, I put giving on the narcissist side. And so what they will be doing is giving. So they're big gift givers. They'll give and give and give and give. They're very kind. It's great to receive gifts. And often they will know what someone needs before that other person really knows what they need themselves. And so they appear to be very intuitive gift giver. Then there's the dark side of that too. So it's really good that there's this the blackness there, because the gifts aren't necessarily gifts. Because when you give a gift, a proper gift is you give it to the person and you surrender it, and whatever they do with it, it's up to them. And it's actually for them. It turns out the narcissist gives a gift that is actually for the narcissist. The narcissist needs something called supply, so they need the validation. So they'll give a gift in order to appear a certain way, as generous, as kind, as thoughtful, so it's actually just an appearance. So when you're getting a gift from the narcissist, you give them the feedback that they need. Now, if you don't accept the gift, or if you don't use it in the way that they want, you'll feel that. That you've offended them in some way, or they didn't get the feedback that they needed. And subtly, if you're paying attention to this, once you've been around these people, you'll start to notice that, like, there's this thing in the background where it's like, wait a second, like, there's something I can't put my finger on, but like, there's some dishonesty going on with this. Some would call it manipulation. So if you've ever felt a little manipulated when you've been given a gift, sort of like that they're not really just giving it to you. It's actually because they need the supply, they need the feedback in order to feel okay. I'll go into where this stuff comes from, because it's the codependent has a similar mechanism, a little different though. And so hopefully we'll flesh these out. So the narcissist is giving, so in appearance, and this is the surface, and there's multiple levels of how we relate with the world. And on appearance, it'll appear that the codependent is taking. So when they get in a relationship, is the narcissist is giving, 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 and the codependent is taking, taking, taking. They're receiving the narcissist gifts. Receiving, oh, thank you. And I tell you, it's constant. It's constant. And so the codependent, which is more of a hermitid, they're a little more withdrawn. They're so sensitive that they're constantly receiving the gifts, that it's an appearance, but they're actually giving everything of themselves so that the narcissist can continue to give and get the feedback. And so it's like the codependent that is so sensitive to the shame and rage of the narcissist can't actually express themselves properly because it's too volatile. And so they will take the gifts and not be able to give in the way that the narcissist wants. So it'll actually trigger the narcissist to then leave, or to get into all their manipulative tactics to try to receive the feedback that they need. But what the codependent is actually giving everything of themselves, and I'll get into more of how that works as I talk as well. So over the course of time, it'll appear as if the codependent is taking and taking and taking, and so then that'll leave the narcissist to want to find a new supply, and so they will have their their list of X's, their list of all these things in the background that they'll use, and they'll dangle it over the head of the codependent and say, hey, I've got a list of 12 guys, and I'm going to speak from my experience, and it can go either way. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. These are the same traits. They found the narcissist across cultures, time, countries, language, it doesn't matter. They do the same thing. They'll use the same phrases even, and it doesn't matter where they've discovered this. It's the same similar phrases. It's hypnotic, and it actually entrains your mind. So this is an interesting phenomenon that occurs as you actually become entrained, and it's like they put a straw into your forehead, and they suck the life out of you. They suck your mind and your heart out from you as they're going through these things, and it all happens mostly unconsciously without you knowing. Like a parasite. It's sort of like a mind parasite that sucks you out because they need that supply. Um, let's see. They need the supply because they have an external locus of control. And I'm not just raging on the narcissist. I'm going to go into the codependent as well to balance this out. I can only talk about one at a time though, so it's like this is what I'm doing. So the narcissist needs an external. They have an external locus of control, which means they need that validation from the outside to say you're okay. If the narcissist, well, no narcissist, unless something massive happened later in life that turned them into a narcissist, some major trauma, has childhood wounds. It would be abandonment, neglect, abuse of to some capacity. It's usually more extreme capacity, to where they have a submerged rage and shame and fear, and that is the compensation mechanism for that is to manipulate the world to get what they need. So that's where the hidden strings that are attached to the gifts. It's the gift that says, "I'm okay. Like, look how great I am." So they'll twist the story. They'll make things grandiose. You've heard of grandiose narcissism. All narcissists have this sense of grandiosity. The covert ones or the vulnerable ones are a little more subtle. But you will find how they can take a story and turn it to make them appear as if greater than they are. So that way they don't seem to be just a regular person, just like you and me. Um, so let's see here. So that's the external locus of control, because it's a balancing mechanism to protect themselves from the fear and shame and abandonment that they had experienced, and then never grown out of. The sick thing is that this goes on to adulthood, and they willingly don't do the work to heal these wounds, because in that shame, the balancing mechanism of shame is pride. And so when you're locked in pride, you think like, I'm the greatest thing in the world. Why do I need to change? You're the problem. So pride is probably one of the most difficult levels of consciousness to transcend, because in pride there is no problem with oneself. The other person's the problem, obviously. Um, and so in that state of pride, they're unwilling to get help. Until like maybe if something catastrophic and extreme happens that forces them into therapy where they have to do it and their life falls apart. But I guess it turns out research shows that rarely happens, to where they'll go. They might go to a therapist for appearance or for a short time, but then it turns out they're better than their therapist. And so they manipulate the therapist and they think they're fine, and then they leave and don't do it. So this is the dark side. It's perfect that this is black, because it's such a dark personality trait to be in, where they think that they're better than everybody, and they're extremely manipulative. The stories that they tell, they will. I'm just going to go through some of these things, and it's not in a format, but they will tell like in order to get the attention that they need and to appear to be a victim, because they have to be a victim. Otherwise, it means they have to take ownership of bad things that they've done, and in pride, they can't do that. So it's always the other person, and those are signs. You'll notice that if someone is unable to take accountability for their own actions, then it's like, they might do it if they do something bad in a social setting that compromises their social standing. So let's say they like have an affair with someone that's within their social area, that maybe, let's say, is a business owner or is someone of high standing, high ranking in their estimation. Then they go and have an affair. They'll do something to cover that up, or to apologize or something to a certain level, because it'll compromise their social standing. They don't do it because they care. They do it because it compromises the appearance of their social standing, which is trumped up anyways. I know so many business owners that are extremely humble and don't use their position of ownership or exposure in a community as a means of propping themselves up to seem better than they are because they're just regular people. And then the narcissist will use their exposure as a way to make themselves seem more important than they really are in their own lives. And this comes through, you can tell through dialogue and so forth, how the subtle things that they say that does that. So let me flip over to the codependent and get some balance here real quick. I don't want to rage too hard on the narcissist, because eventually there is a point where this yin and the yang flips, and as it circulates, and there'll be, the light and the dark exists in both. Codependent, obviously childhood trauma, no boundaries. You can call them an empath. I would consider them, and again, I'm talking about myself, having very acute empathy, but as a codependent, it is unhealthy empathy, because the codependent doesn't know the borders or the boundaries of where they stop and the other begins. This comes from childhood trauma and lack of nurturing, lack of available caregivers that gives the nurturing and the love that a child needs. So the codependent rarely ever has experienced unconditional love, which is what the narcissist provides in the love bombing phase. That's how they get sucked in. It's just like, you're perfect as you are for the first 6 months. And then all of a sudden, all the shit starts showing up, and you're not perfect anymore because your supply has run out. You start to get depleted. So the codependent never knew who they were, because as an infant, I've had this experience recently on a bufo. The Sonoran desert toad took me down to this visceral experience of, if you don't know what that is 5-MeO-DMT. It's considered the God particle. It is supposed to provide this experience of universal consciousness. I had experienced that in deep meditation many years ago, so this is not a foreign idea to me. But my experience of bufo was actually extremely dark. It took me into the fetus that I was at one point, and it gave me a visceral experience of absorbing the toxic emotions of my family that wasn't doing their work. So my mother, who was unavailable to provide the love and support for a child and the nurturing, and father wasn't there. They went through their the divorce when I was a child, and the chaos and the trauma, the abuse, the neglect, and everything that was there. The house was too volatile for the codependent to properly express itself and to get its needs met. It didn't get its needs met because nobody in the house was getting their needs met. And so that volatility caused the infant to grow into this child that it's like into a wall of razor blades. So if you express yourself, you're putting yourself out there, there's razor blades there, and you can't touch that. So you would withdraw and do everything to keep safe. And so the codependent grows up as an empath, because they're so sensitive to others and had never created the boundaries. And so there had never been the individuation that happens, I think they say like 18 months. And sometime between there and then you get into the twos, where it's the terrible twos into the threes, and there's a discovery of the self that's separate from mother, and it starts to see different object orientation. And if that doesn't occur in a properly nurtured child, there's no boundaries. And so I grew up for the first 45, 46 years being able to read the thoughts and feelings of those around me. But then there's not a differentiation between self and other. It's a really interesting phenomena that occurs. Like we're all connected on a very fundamental level. But the codependent has that sort of hindrance, because it doesn't know the difference in how to do that. And so the thoughts and feelings, the hidden thoughts and feelings going through you. So it's not only just your overt ones, it's your hidden, so the dark side. So the codependent knows your dark side, but then it doesn't know what to do with it. That's why it's unhealthy. That's why it would be an unhealthy empath, because it's not good to know someone's dark side and then hold on to it and roll it around, because then it gets rolled around in judgment instead of being able to be released, instead of being able to be healed. When you get into a healthy codependent, when the codependency is healed, the codependent would just be an empath, and it has the possibility of being a healer. So this is where it gets in actually where the narcissist might actually be a blessing. For one, they provide the experience of unconditional love, the unconditional love that the codependent never experienced. And so that is, if you've never experienced that to your mind, like, oh my God, it is the best thing in the world. That's why I think codependents are actually, when they break up with the narcissist, actually go through withdrawal. It's a drug withdrawal. You go through actual withdrawal symptoms because you're missing your supplier. It's interesting because they're your supplier, yet you are their supply. It gets into this really fascinating dance that the codependent and the narcissist do. So the only thing is, you need that particular narcissist for your supply. The narcissist just needs supply, and there's billions of bodies on the earth, so they don't really give a fuck because they'll just go to the next supply. You know, they'll be in bed with their new guy. They were actually probably sleeping with their new guy before, but you know, if they weren't, they'll pick that up, you know, within days or hours, right away. So they're you know, so there's that supply. These I want to get into the reflective nature at some point as well, because there is a point in life where all the narcissist is doing is reflecting back the the unhealed guilt and shame that the codependent actually has, as a result of decisions made and actions taken as a result of not having any boundaries. And so, God, this would be a really long course. I'm going to try to just flesh these out, and what you grab onto, and what you don't, you don't. But think about these, because there's a reflective nature where we're always meeting ourselves. Course in Miracles says there's nothing outside of yourself. When you get into the higher spiritual teachings, that is the spiritual realization that you're all of it. You're the whole shebang. And so, just in duality, we experience the dual nature of things. So, in the reflection, what the narcissist is doing to the codependent is actually revealing to the codependent what's still unsettled in them, their hidden shame, their fears, their judgments, and all that stuff from their entire life of growing up, of not having any boundaries, of not knowing the difference between self and other, on the internal state. This is where it gets really interesting and takes a lot of fucking humility to look at, and courage. Because as I sat and meditated after these months, I went through 2 months of not sleeping, looking at this darkness in me, and really just this black hole, which is interesting because as I would meditate on this, the pain and terror, I'm actually still surprised that I survived this experience. There were many times where I had to consciously breathe, and still in a daily practice, I have to consciously breathe to bring myself into the body. Even after, hard to describe this, but even about 2 weeks ago, I almost left the body while driving on Lakeshore Drive, and I have a witness to this as well. And it was really just a spirit leaving, because this narcissist sucks everything out of you. I don't even want to say that, because the narcissist loves this, because it gives them feedback of the power that they have. But I will follow it up by saying that a narcissist is the most irresponsible being on the planet, because they choose not to do the work because they're stuck in pride from their childhood trauma. So while there's no blame, they actually are aware subtly that there is something that they have to reckon with. And that'll come in their own time, in their own karma. They'll get revealed to themselves. We all get revealed to ourselves at some point. And what I found is the narcissist is a gift, because I got revealed to myself, but just not in a like a serving at a time. Like most healthy people or well-balanced people that have been nurtured in an okay manner will get like doses throughout lifetime that they get to deal with, and the codependent really doesn't, because they're always in some sort of relationship that's not toxic, but like dysfunctional, right? Because they are dysfunctioned within themselves. And so what the narcissist does, and this is where it's possibly the gift, is they just give you the entire fucking platter. It's like, here's everything, and if you can survive this, then you can survive and thrive, and if not, then you're dead in the water. And literally, so many people that don't survive the narcissistic relationship because they end up either committing suicide or something really bad happens, because it is deep and it's dark. But really the gift is it's showing you everything, and if you have the courage to look at it, like, courage is a high state. Pride pride's a low state. Pride is not a life affirming state. That's why a narcissist is the blackness here in this, because it's not a life affirming state. And the prideful state lacks courage. A narcissist actually has no courage to face their life. They make excuses, they make everybody else responsible for their failures, and they have to trump up with lies and deceit to keep that going. And so they will do everything they can to take down um, the other person and to break them down. And they do this through their words. They do this through subtle manipulation and gaslighting. These things called flying monkeys. Oh, this is a great tangent here. Sorry, everything's connected, so I go off on tangents. These flying monkeys. There was a period where, like, I would just go about my regular day. I was super busy with work, many projects, and all of a sudden, it's like I go to the hardware store that I go to 1,000 times, and all of a sudden, now that I'm in the life with this narcissist, there's all these flying monkeys around, people keeping track of my location. And so, and it's a strange psychological phenomenon that happens. It's like, it's unreal how this would happen. Because I would just pull into the parking lot and all of a sudden someone else is there. It's like, oh, hey, what are you doing? It's like, oh, I'm shopping. I've got all of my projects that I'm doing. Oh, yeah, great to see you. Oh, I'm just going to text so-and-so that you're here. It's like, okay, not necessary, but like, that's fine. I didn't, it's just some of these things just seemed a little weird. Or then, a neighbor moves in across the street that I chat to and has some questions for me, so we talk a bit, and like all these weird things. Like all of a sudden, everywhere I go, it turns out there's speculation that I'm having an affair with an acupuncturist that I'm going to, because I've got some issues with part of my body. And what they'll do is they don't say that they don't trust the person. What they'll do is they're like, oh, I don't know where he is. It's just strange. And so they'll leave things open. So they're left open for speculation, and the other person will then fill in the gaps with projection. And then they get these flying monkeys going around checking in so that the narcissist knows where about this person is at all times. And they'll leave out details. They'll never take responsibility for anything. And they'll leave you to fill in the gaps with the worst scenario. So now you're saying and confirming that something nefarious is going on, so they have a reason to not trust, and then they have a reason to be the victim, because the narcissist has to be the victim. They're the ultimate victim. They're the best victim ever. They're so innocent and sweet, and the victim of victims. It's amazing. So this is just a strange thing that would happen, is all of a sudden it's like, the codependent, or let's say the narcissistic victim, gets secluded. And so they get secluded from their friends. They get secluded. So basically, they become, like a hermit in a way. It's extremely lonely, because they get, with the lies and manipulation that go on, is isolated. That's the word. They get isolated. So the narcissist will isolate the victim, because word can't go out that the narcissist is lying and manipulating. Because if anyone heard a balanced story of what was actually going on, then they'd put two and two together. But the narcissist will isolate the victim, which is their partner, or it's even friends. If you're friends with the narcissist, you'll find that you might feel a little more isolated than you have been before, and that so it's, yeah, you'll find out as soon as you don't provide the supply that the narcissist needs. You'll have to go through your darkness too. And then you'll find out, like, holy shit, this stuff's dark. How do I survive? So they'll isolate, and these flying monkeys, it's just so wild, because people would come out of the woodwork and have, location status on me when I'm just going about my day, and then I go home. But it's just a strange phenomenon, because there's this air of mistrust. And so they provide that air of mistrust. They're unwilling to talk about it, so it makes you, as this is where like the gaslighting and stuff comes in too, is they'll deny, or you start to rationalize, or you start to share things, and they'll take that and they'll twist it on you in private. Nobody else sees this stuff, so they'll just like slowly cut you away, little bits and pieces, and cut away at your soul and your psyche, until there's like nothing left. It's so amazing, because some of these flying monkeys that would keep track of me are all of a sudden, like, nowhere around, right? Because they're probably flying monkeys to the next source of supply for the narcissist. It's really fucked up. Um, yeah, it's I can't say that more. But they have this external locus of control. I don't remember if I covered that. This external locus of control where because of their trauma, being traumatized and shamed as a child, they need the outside world to say they're okay because they never got that. The outside world beat them down as a child during these formative years. From 0 to 7, our personalities are set as our survival mechanism. We take that in as our operating system through life until we start to deal with healing these childhood wounds, and then we can become free. And a lot of spirituality is about becoming free, and that freeness comes from integrating that child that was traumatized, or not nurtured, the things that were missing, and we have to integrate that. And that's why there's these therapies like reparenting and so forth, is doing the things that our parents weren't able to do for us, and we have to integrate that and create that for ourselves. And so the narcissist does this by sucking supply out of you through manipulation, to get what they need, to get the validation. They're just a regular person, and they'll tell a story of and it's tell a story in a way where you give them the feedback, where you'll actually agree with them, just to either get them to shut up or because you believe their story. It seems romantic and magical, but it's like they're just a regular person. They'll take a vanilla box and put a piece of furniture in it and tell you it's the most beautiful thing in the world, which in reality they just couldn't afford a bigger box. It's like they have a mediocre life, they have a mediocre job, they have mediocre friends and mediocre everything, and they'll trump it up as if it's like all these things in their lives are better than they really are, when everything's just average. We're all average. I'm average. You're average. And there's no need to trump up a story to be better than somebody else. It's kind of fucked up to want to be better than someone else. That means that I'm holding somebody else down. And it doesn't, I don't know. That doesn't sit right with me. And it sounds like I'm putting down the narcissist. I'm just talking about the traits, because the codependent has their fucked up behaviors too, from not knowing who they are, and actually giving of them to everything of themselves because there's no boundaries. So that leads to actions and behaviors where we merge with other people so easily. So it's easy to fall in love. It's easy to want to merge and have. It's actually kind of a good feeling to come across a codependent initially, because there is a merging, but then the codependent doesn't know who they are, so it creates a lot of problems because a lot of the judgments roll in their mind and they don't know how to relate with it. So it ends up with a lot of guilt and shame from not from the childhood, but from actions as they grow up and go through adolescence and adulthood. So that's where the narcissist reflects that back, because all these things are harbored inside the codependent, which keeps them from having a very loving relationship, like an authentically loving relationship, and actually fulfilling their goals, because there was a self-sabotage mechanism set in place from their belief that they're not good enough. They've never been able to express themselves. They've never been supported in the things that they want to do, and this was their life story. This is the reflection that comes back. And the narcissist basically says, like, I'm going to give you everything you need, so here's unconditional love for a little while I'm sucking you in. So that's the hook. It's like, let me show you this unconditional love. You're perfect as you are. And the codependent's like, this is the best drug ever because I've never experienced that. So let's merge. We'll come in, we'll identify with each other, and then I'm going to give you everything you need because I don't want you to be triggered, because then also I'm sensitive to your inner dark side, and it's volatile and we can't have that. So I'm going to give you everything of myself. And so, shame on the codependent for doing this. The codependent is also supporting the narcissist in what it's doing. And so the narcissist sucks all the supply out of the codependent, which willingly gave it. And then the codependent is left as this empty shell. The parasite came in, sucks everything out, and everything is gone. And so you've got hobbies, profession, all this stuff. whatever the codependent was interested in doing, the narcissist takes that on as their own. And so if the codependent was a runner, let's say, the narcissist will start running, but then they'll draw all attention back to the narcissist. So the narcissist will be like, oh, look what I'm doing. And the codependent doesn't have any boundaries and is sensitive, and takes no agency for his own life. And that's the thing. This is the bad part of the codependent is personal agency, of taking ownership of things and developing itself in a capacity to where it's autonomous and it's fully realized on its own, because it's been dependent on, like, it needed the mother figure, it needed that figure to nurture it, because it didn't have that within itself. And so it's like, yes, let me give you everything. And so the narcissist will take ownership of that in some weird way. So what I found, running, cycling, get into swimming, all of a sudden the narcissist is doing all these things, but to draw the light away from the codependent onto the narcissist, because the narcissist needs to feed. Even fixing things. That's what I do for a living, fixing things. And this narcissist would then get into doing that herself in ways, well, partly because I wouldn't go and do that for her, and there's a whole backstory to this stuff, but doing that, but then drawing this grand picture and a story for, say, social media posts or something that would then draw the light to the narcissist and away from the codependent. And I'm sure there's nefarious intentions in there subtly. So these are the things that happen. And so when the narcissist and the codependent split, the narcissist has taken everything with them away from the codependent. So the codependent is left, it's so fitting, it's this white empty shell. This just left this empty shell with a black hole in their heart. And this is where, so everything the codependent's identified with. This is why a lot of them kill themselves, or go into a very dark place. It's really hard to get out of, because there's nothing left. All identification is gone. This is where it's a gift, and I'm taking this as a gift because I've been doing deep dives, doing my healing, really looking and having the courage to look at this stuff, the most painful things in the world, the humility to look within and to see that this narcissist was reflecting back hidden inner natures that were still unsettled in myself. And so now the great gift is that the codependent has the opportunity to develop these things, to discover what the codependent likes and dislikes, discover the boundaries and borders, and basically develop all these things as an adult, as a conscious adult, to where it no longer becomes codependent, it becomes dependent, not dependent, becomes independent, independent, not needing these things to be filled by someone else. So in a way, the narcissist is the greatest gift because it can bring someone to a place where they become a fully individualized human being, that has all the power that is inherent within, able to realize it, not dependent on anybody else, which is the healthiest state to be in. And has the possibility of realizing the highest states of consciousness because of that. The narcissist, unfortunately, doesn't have that opportunity because getting out of a state of pride, given some extreme catastrophe, is, say, highly unlikely. So I guess the research shows that unless they get mortified, there's no hope of curing there's no cure for narcissism unless they get mortified, and then you get into the spiritual side where you actually have to do a deep dive and look within and do this work. And this is a spiritual work in nature. There's no real Western scientific way to cure narcissism. It takes a spiritual approach, and they have to have enough humility to approach spirituality. And so that's a tough one. Like, it's approach spirituality in depth, not in like show, like go to church because it looks good or whatever. So I'm going to say that the narcissist is the greatest scourge on the face of the earth, and also the greatest blessing. And I think it's fitting because as you have the yin and the yang, and we experience duality, is you have to have both. You can't ignore one or the other. You know, you've got a coin and you got heads and tails on it. You can't have a proper coin without heads or tails, and you can't have anything in life without its duality, without its reflection. So the narcissist is a reflection of the codependent when they merge and come together, and it's a terrifying, treacherous, and beautiful thing, um, all in one. And I think it can't be any other way. It's just an amazing thing, but that allows us to possibly heal. And I think this concept is, I think it's brilliant. This flashed in my mind the other day when I was, deeply thinking about this stuff, because I mean I've been deeply thinking about it for months now. It's going on, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 months or something. I don't know. But when you lose all sense of self, it's possibly a very dire situation, and it's also a possibility for a great awakening into becoming a real person, which is an amazing gift, as opposed to having all of these things just happen automatically and we just would grow up assuming we are who we are. So that's the other thing, is if you are who you are, you just assume you are. But then if you go through this process of losing the self completely and having to find and develop it, then I would argue that you really know who you are, which is an empty shell, making up arbitrary preferences. So it's one part of losing yourself is possibly awakening to a deeper level of spirituality. So anyways, that is my dark rant on the narcissist and the codependent, and also it is possibly one of the greatest gifts as well, and I stand by both statements. And that's all for tonight. Thanks for listening. This is Thoughts from Sunrise. Take care.